right, welcome. Thank you for joining us on either Facebook or YouTube, depending on your platform of choice. My name's Sean Powers. I'm Director of Admissions for Ross University School of Medicine. Today, we continue our ongoing series of conversations with RUSM alumni so that you may hear their thoughts on their Ross experience. You may learn a little bit about how Ross was able to support them along their road to residency. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Ryan Anderson, who just a few weeks ago became RUSM's 15,000th graduate. Welcome, Dr. Anderson. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
And congratulations on the honor of being the 15,000th person to earn a degree from Ross University School of Medicine as we celebrate 42 years of training physicians. Now that a few weeks have passed, have you had any time to reflect on what all that means to you?
So everything's been great so far. Being the 15,000th graduate was pretty unbelievable. It really didn't seem real until we actually watched it on the virtual ceremony, and all my friends and family they kept asking me, like, did you know this was going to happen, or how did this work out? But it's been pretty neat. It's definitely something I'll remember forever.
And you're joining us from your new home in Georgia as you prepare to begin your general surgery residency at Northeast Georgia Medical Center, which, as you said, was your first choice for residency. So,
yes,
as a country, we continue to move through such an extraordinary time in our history. And what's it been like for you to move your family during a public health crisis?
Yeah, it was, it was difficult, but surprisingly, it was easier than you would think. I came from Michigan, where I finished up my rotations, which happened to be, some of the heaviest sanctions around the country, to Georgia, which, with the time we moved, ended up being some of the lightest sanctions going around. So that was definitely a difference. But it wasn't too bad. I had my letter in there stating that I was an essential worker in case I needed it for whatever reason. But overall, it wasn't too bad.
And can you share with our audience who it is that we're referencing when we're talking about your family?
So I have my wife, Susie. We've been married for coming up on 13 years this November. My son, Jason, who is 11, and my daughter, Kirsten, who just turned 9 2 days ago.
Oh, wow.
And then I have my dog, Penny, from The Big Bang Theory. She's German Shepherd, and then we have a cat, too.
Well, that's quite a family, and they've really
Yep.
been with you. You can tell by those ages, if you're playing along and listening along at home, they've really been with you every step of the way on your journey to earning your MD. So,
Yep,
well,
definitely.
let's jump in and let's discuss that journey.
Okay.
Now, medicine is not your first profession, but it certainly seems like it's been your calling from a young age. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely.
And I know then as a teenager, you received some exposure to the healthcare field. And would you say that the experiences you had in high school, were those specifically what made you decide to become a physician?
It definitely, we had to, starting out, I was in the thing called a health academy. It was something you applied to and when you were in middle school. When I started, it was actually the very first year that they had started it in our city. And they really brought you into the healthcare industry. You finished all your high school science curriculum, which was great, but then they incorporated other things, like we would meet at hospitals during the week. Depending on the year that you would complete an EMT course, a CNA course, medical terminology. We shadowed some physicians in the hospital. We went down to where all the blood work is analyzed, and we got to see how basically everybody within the hospital, how they worked, and they all contributed in their way to help the patient. So it was definitely a big factor for me, for sure.
So then as you graduate high school, after all these experiences made that impression on you, I guess the traditional path at that point would be college and either a biology or a pre-med focus, but
sure,
not for you though. After high school, you joined the Navy.
Yep. 2 weeks after high school, I was in boot camp. It was something I've always wanted to do. My grandfather was a Marine, and I felt like being in the military was just something that I guess I needed to do. I don't really have any other explanations or reason why I wanted to, but I knew that being a physician was something that was still going to happen, but I was going to be after I did my service. So I went in 2004, got out 6 years later in 2010.
Well, and I'm sure that I speak for our entire audience when I say thank you for your service.
Well, thank you.
After those 6 years, you returned home, and did the focus at that point become getting into medical school?
That was it. That was, it was actually, 6 months prior to getting out of the military, the focus was putting on a plan, saying this is what I'm going to do step by step, and this is how I'm going to get to the point where I'm applying to med school and I'm becoming a physician. So we basically, my wife and I put the groundwork out, and we just had to try to follow the plan as best as we could.
And after you get back, part of what you did to prepare for medical school was working as both an EMT and a non-invasive cardiac technologist. And would you say those
Correct.
roles, did they help prepare you for medical school?
They definitely did, and a lot of the reason it wasn't necessarily just for med school was I needed money. I had a family to support. I had to go to undergrad, and it wasn't like you said, I wasn't the traditional student, so I had more than just me to move along. So I had to get the two jobs while working, and I wanted to make sure that I did it within the healthcare industry because I wanted to make sure I stayed relevant. I wanted to make sure I was still competitive, showing that going into med school I have a background in health, and that was something I was going to that I wanted to keep doing.
So while working and gaining that incredibly valuable experience, I assume you began to investigate and maybe even apply to medical schools at that point in time.
I did. Yep. Towards the end of undergrad, it's been so long now, it seems like, but I think towards the end of it, my last year is when I started to apply. You definitely apply broadly, and the first year it didn't work out. And so I thought, all right, well, it's the dream, so we're going to keep going forward and apply to next year. And then things just weren't working out still. It's a lot more difficult than it appears.
And for so many of our prospective students, that what you just described is such a common theme. Were you getting any interviews, or were you getting any feedback from the schools to which you were applying?
Yep, I had several interviews, and I didn't really get any feedback afterwards. The interviews went great. Everything seemed like it worked out, but nothing ever came about.
Yeah, it's such a shame, obviously, somebody with such a unique background and set of experiences like you not having an opportunity. And there are so many more people
Sure.
like you out there every single year that are like that. I mean, even to this day, there are far more applicants to U.S. medical schools than there are seats available in those schools, and to the tune of
Mhm.
about 30,000 people who apply every year and don't get in, even to this point, even with the expansion of the number of medical schools in the country, the expansion of existing programs. So you're certainly not alone, and clearly in your case, as our audience will continue to hear, you're certainly quite an outstanding applicant. So now at this point in time, we're what, about 6-7 years ago, I guess, and somewhere along there.
Yep.
You're looking for, I guess, a steadier income.
Sure.
At that point, you made another interesting choice that was not medicine, to family, and you chose to become a police officer at that point.
Right.
Why a cop?
Yeah, well, I mean, it all started, applying for a couple of years, still working in those two jobs, and then having three other people to take care of it. We weren't really making ends meet at all. It was just we were working a lot, and it just wasn't working out. And I didn't want to keep putting my family through me applying, and it's expensive to apply too. And so it got to the point where I figured I was in the military. I had a good background in the military, and a next, I guess, way for me to go would be police officer. It was just it seemed like it was a good fit in a way. So I applied to my hometown essentially for the police department there, and I was accepted. And within, I say, probably 6 months or so of applying, we were moving from Nebraska to Colorado to start the training academy.
And can you then comment on how your time with the police led you back toward medicine?
Sure. So, as a police officer, you're doing a lot of stuff in the emergency room or in the hospital. So, whether you just went to a domestic violence and you're having to go and speak to the victim in the hospital, or somebody just got into a car crash and you need to speak to the people in the hospital as well. So you're going in there quite a bit, it seems like. And every time I went into the hospital, I saw physicians, I saw the healthcare workers in there, and I missed it. Hearing the lingo of them talking and just knowing that that's what I really wanted to do. And I'd go home and I'd tell my wife all the time that it's like, I'm miserable doing what I want to do. This is not me. This is not what I was meant to do. So at that point, that's when we kind of sat down and we just thought about it. We're like, all right, what can we do? What are some options out there for us?
And I guess around that time, you found out about RUSM. So how did you do
it.
that? And what made you want to apply?
I actually had, I hadn't thought about the Caribbean route. There was always, going through the undergrad, there was always that stigma about the Caribbean. And, it was more of my fault for not looking into it when I was applying to med school in the beginning, just because I listened to everybody else out there about the stigmas rather than doing the research myself and actually reading about the schools and seeing what they were all about. So I had a good friend of mine who went to a different Caribbean school, and he started telling me about it. And him and I worked together in the EMS. And I figured, he's a really smart guy, really good guy, and if he's going there, why not me? So that's when I started looking in, and I looked through several of the Caribbean schools, and when I found Ross, it just seemed like we fit. I would fit better with Ross. And honestly, it's hard to explain. It's just reading the profiles, reading everything about Ross, it just seemed like I would be a good fit there.
Sometimes you just know.
You just know.
And for our audience, you're welcome to visit us at rossu.edu for admissions information and how to apply. All right, so Ryan, then you started at Ross in the May 2016 semester, and we do have 3 start dates per year. We have the traditional September start date, but we also welcome a new class in both January and May. So why was the May term right for you?
Well, it was already January when I started to apply, and the next 2 times, obviously, were May and September, and I just wanted to start as soon as I can. So May was the one we chose, just because I wanted to get in there and start.
The sooner you can begin, the sooner you can end, right?
Exactly.
Start sooner, finish faster, and that's really one of the hallmarks of Ross University School of Medicine. And having those 3 options is really key. And certainly today, it's no different. Students, depending on where they are and their path toward going to medical school, one term may fit them better than the other. And we can certainly work with prospective students to help them determine that. So I want to make mention that while today we're located on the island of Barbados, at the time our campus was in Dominica, our home for 39 years prior to Hurricane Maria in 2017. Take us back to your arrival in Dominica, Dr. Anderson. You spent the 16 months there, and what comes to your mind when you think back on your arrival?
It was very interesting, to say the least. I had never been to a country like that. My wife and kids actually stayed home. My kids were in school, so I didn't want to pull them out of school and put them through all that. And so it was just me showing up on this island. We showed up. It was a small little airport. Everybody was on the small little plane. We're all Rossies already, so it had a little more comfort in it. But you land in a small airport, and the people there were amazing immediately. So as soon as you land, everybody's there wanting to help you out. They're ready to help get your bags, put them in the taxis, get you on your long, windy trek back to the school, or where you would stay. And it was very, very humid. So I was coming from Colorado, where it's essentially as dry as can be, to you're sweating in the first couple of minutes off the plane. So it was all a lot to take in for that first day.
You mentioned the windy road and the hour trip to campus, and
Yep.
Because of the humidity, and they would actually give you the Dramamine on the way.
Sure.
Welcome to medical school.
Yeah, right.
That's one of the rites of passage of so many Rossies in the Dominica era. So for those of you who are watching and thinking about applying now, you'll have no such experience as a badge of honor like Dr. Anderson here, because in Barbados the campus or the housing is about 5 minutes from the airport, so it's a pretty quick ride, and it's flat. So it's a little bit simpler than what Dr. Anderson is describing.
Sounds like it.
So. But while you're there, of course, you're there for a reason. It's a means to an end, and that's where you were completing what we call the medical sciences curriculum. Other places may refer to it as basic sciences. So, and you did very well, as a student. So, why do you feel that you were successful? What type of student were you? And just when you think back to the education and how you attacked it, why were you successful?
So a lot of mine was I wanted to do as best as I could, not just for me, but the more knowledge I gained, the better I was going to be, the better physician I was going to be treating my patients in the future. So the way I also looked at it was a job for me. I was spending money to do this. My family was back at home. It wasn't a vacation for me. It was sit down, get in the books, read and learn as much as I could every day. And so a couple of my friends that were on the island, I was a hermit essentially. I stayed in, I studied a day. I studied 10 to 12 hours a day, every single day. The only time I take off was when you have a test. You have essentially like a free day the day afterwards until you start new material. So that was my good freebie for a little bit. But that's really what I did. I studied the material a lot. I went into the anatomy labs. I went into the school to get on any of the technology that they had just to help me learn. But yeah, it's basically, it was just, you got to, there's so much information, you have to take time to take it all in.
And, having had some experience with medical facilities in the United States through your previous lives, what were your thoughts on the quality of the facilities on campus at Ross?
The campus, it was unbelievable. Like I said, state-of-the-art technology. Anything you could want was essentially there. One of the best things about it was the cadaver lab. I absolutely love that. It was probably one of the best learning experiences I've ever had. I never really got to experience anything like that before, but being able to study the anatomy and then being able to go and actually have it on a live, on a cadaver in the lab itself it was pretty amazing.
Certainly the facilities are one thing, but obviously you need someone to lead you through what you can do within them. So about the faculty, what are your thoughts on the faculty?
The faculty they were always there to help you out. I never got turned away for anything. Everybody has that, that open door type policy. It seems like anytime you have a question on anything, whether you send it through an email, I'd get an email back on, within an hour, almost every single time. And just being able to go into their office or knock on their door if you need any help. Like I said, everybody's there for you. It was pretty unbelievable. It almost seems like, it doesn't seem like it would be that great, but it really was.
One of the things that, we tend to hear from physicians who attended other medical schools is the level of competitiveness among the students, and in some cases, even a cutthroat attitude among students. But can you comment on what it was like for you with your fellow students at Ross?
So it was great. You really didn't see the competitiveness there. Everybody was really out there to help each other. Specifically, I had a couple buddies, especially the first semester when you're really diving into this information and you're trying to learn through a fire hydrant. We would get together after lectures and we would basically study together. People were there to help you out. You really didn't get that sense of competitiveness where somebody's going to try to outdo you.
You said that you would spend hours upon hours a day, studying and working. So if you can think back, I know it's been a few years, but if you could take us through, what would a typical day be like for you from sunup to sundown or beyond?
So one of the great things I liked about Ross, and you correct me if I'm not sure if they're still doing that. I would assume they would in Barbados, but they would record the lecturer giving the lectures, and you had the software where you could actually watch the lecture, and that way you can rewind it, pause it, do whatever you need to do, take your notes. So that's how I did it. So I think in the 2 years I was on the island, I maybe went into a lecture twice. I was basically I would study in my apartment, and so I'd wake up and I'd go through the lectures in the morning, and usually get you done to, if I remember right, it's between like 12 and 2 or so. And then once all the lectures are complete, you'd have a lot of material to go over, whether you're reading, you're taking your notes. And so I'd finish that probably around anywhere from 8 to 10 p.m. And that was my evening, and then start over, wake up at 8 in the morning the next day and do it all over again.
It's a grind,
It is.
And what you're describing, you would have known as MediaSite, which was technology that was invented at Ross about 15 years ago, and has moved on and progressed to what we use today called Panopto, but it would be very, very familiar to you for sure. And to be sure, what you've described, it's not distance learning, because you're still there at the campus, you're still there working with your faculty are still there to field questions from you, as you described, and that's extremely important. And it takes quite a bit of self-discipline. It sounds like it would be similar to some people the first time you hear it, but it takes a lot of self-discipline to make sure that you keep up every day with those lectures, logging in and watching them. You're still responsible for the material each day, because those mini exams come up very, very quickly. So
very true.
And what you mentioned in general about mentioning that you assume we do a lot of the same things in Barbados, and that's true. So what we've taken is everything certainly that worked well in Dominica for all those years, and as things progressed, and we've brought all of those things with us as we've built out a new campus in Barbados. And we went through this, as we were refining the curriculum and putting the campus together before we opened at the beginning of 2019. It gives you a really interesting opportunity to take a look at what you're doing when you're starting something from essentially from scratch because you're building out new facilities. So there are a number of different ways that we've moved the program even further forward than from when you were there. It was working well when you were there, and we feel that it's only gotten better.
That's great.
So it's and thanks to students like you and the feedback that you've provided, we continue to progress and grow ourselves. So after you complete the medical sciences program in Dominica, but before you can progress into the clinical sciences program, which is within our hospital affiliate network here in the United States, you have to overcome the USMLE Step 1, just like any medical student halfway through their program. So based on what you were able to learn during the medical sciences, Dr. Anderson, how well prepared did you feel going into Step 1?
I definitely felt great. And, what really helped a lot, though, was before you're able to take Step 1, and it was for us before we left the island, we took a test called the COMP, and it would give you a score afterwards, and it had a slight correlation towards the actual Step 1, and it would give you an idea of where you fell in a score range. And so that helped a lot. But overall, when I started studying, really getting heavy into studying for Step 1, I realized that how much I actually knew and how well prepared I really was based off of the material that we learned just in the sciences on the island. And so I took some time, 5 to 6 weeks, I think it was, to take Step 1, and ended up doing pretty well on it. I definitely contribute that towards the teachings that I had on the island.
And you're not alone. Each year we post a first-time pass rate on USMLE Step 1 in the high 90% range. Last available data was 96% first-time pass rate. So our students do extremely well, and they score just about on par in terms of the actual score, along with their U.S. counterparts. One thing that we're doing differently today, you mentioned that you took 5 or 6 weeks before you took Step 1, and then for you that would have meant that after you passed Step 1, you would have then progressed into the next phase for clinical
Right.
rotations, or what we call IMF, the Internal Medicine Foundations. But today what we do it a little bit differently. And so for our audience, right after you complete the medical sciences, you immediately move into the you immediately move into Internal Medicine Foundations, which we run in conjunction with Cleveland Clinic in Florida, in Weston, Florida, which is right in between Fort Lauderdale and Miami. So it's a great clinical partner for us. And that's an 8-week experience right after the medical sciences, during which we have Step 1 preparation built in. So the structure of the program is similar, but you're able to get into the clinical experience a little bit faster. So while you had that experience in Dominica, as I mentioned, we've successfully transferred that type of student experience to a campus in Barbados. That's where we've been operating, since the beginning of 2019. Right now, of course, we are temporarily operating in an online format due to the ongoing pandemic. But certainly something that has not changed, and that's our major curricular focus on clinically relevant activities and patient simulation during the early semesters. So this I'll ask you, Dr. Anderson, do you feel that that focus helped you prepare for your clinical rotations in years 3 and 4, and how?
Yeah, definitely. So as you're saying, when I went through IMF, it seems like it was a little bit different, but we were able to shadow a physician. I think in mine, I shadowed a family med physician in her office, and I thought that was great. It really took the pressure off of getting into the hospital and wondering, what am I going to do now? You're so used to just whether you're sitting at home or you're sitting in school studying, and now all of a sudden you're going into a hospital, or you're going into a physician's office, and you're seeing patients now, and it's a big difference. And so having that transition before getting into the 3rd and 4th year, it was great. It really helped out pretty significantly.
How about we'll take it back. How about during the medical sciences? Did you feel that the focus on patient simulation and clinically relevant activities earlier on, did that impact you as well? Did it help you feel more comfortable even before going into IMF? Sure,
it definitely, you do quite a bit of simulations when you're on the island. You deal with the simulated patients, people coming in, and they have a script, essentially what they're supposed to be following. And so that it definitely helps a lot, just giving you that confidence, or that ability to feel a little more comfortable talking to people, especially as you're going throughout school and you're taking these exams. And it is kind of awkward initially talking to somebody who is reading off of their script they have memorized, rather than talking about something real that's going on with them. So that can be a little awkward, but as you progress, it's something that it's not going to stop. You're going to have to keep doing that. And when you study for step 2 CS and you're seeing 10 or 12 patients like that, one after the other, it definitely it makes you feel a little bit more comfortable. You could dive into that scenario much quicker than it would be had you not been practicing so much.
So of course, years 3 and 4 at Ross, this international medical school, you actually do years 3 and 4 within the United States, within our affiliate clinical network. And you spent your clinical years at St. Joseph Mercy Oakland Hospital, which is in suburban Michigan. When you think back on your time there, what do you think about, and what was the experience like at St. Joe's?
St. Joe's was great though. I liked it a lot. The residents were great, especially the surgery residents. Those are the ones I kind of gravitated towards, being that that's what I wanted to do. But overall, I had a great experience. I learned more than I ever thought I could learn. And they really did immerse you into the point where sometimes you didn't necessarily feel like a medical student. The residents or some of the attending physicians, once they started to trust you and they started to realize where your level was, they'd give you more responsibility and allow you to do things that you feel that would be maybe beyond what a medical student would be able to do. But it gives you that experience. It gives you that confidence that you're definitely going to need as you start progressing on.
And how about support from the administration? Because when you think about it as a prospective student, you're hearing us talk about how the first 2 years students are all together on a campus, but then years 3 and 4, the students are dispersed into a network of affiliate accredited teaching hospitals within the United States. So, how does student support work, and did you feel supported, and how did that work during your clinical years?
Sure. I guess I got lucky and things went pretty smooth for me. I never really had to deal with the school essentially a lot. A lot of the stuff that we did at St. Joseph, you actually have a faculty member that they essentially work for Ross, and they work within the hospital to help you. They're kind of the middleman between, the hospital and Ross itself. And ours was Sandy at St. Joseph Oakland, who she's now retired, but she was amazing. She was great. She made it so much easier for anybody. It took away that stress of wondering what you needed to do or how you're going to set up your next rotation and stuff like that. Essentially, it was all done on her side. So everything went unbelievably smooth for me. It seems like it shouldn't have gone that smooth, but it really did.
Well, that's the great thing about these long-term affiliations that we've had with these U.S. teaching hospitals, is that we can have that sort of relationship with them where we have great support right there for our students within the hospitals themselves. One of the things that prospective students often are concerned about, and with good reason, when they're working through their options for an international medical school, and they take a look at those clinical years 3 and 4, and they see so many different hospitals out there. And at Ross, we have sort of a limited number of hospitals that we work with, but we have plenty of spaces for our students available in those hospitals, which allows our students, if they choose, not to have to move around, then stay in one spot for years 3 and 4, which is extremely rare for international medical schools. And certainly for year number 3, students at Ross stay in one spot. All of our students do. But for 4th year, they do have the rare option of staying in that same spot for their elective rotations as well. And that's what worked out for you. You chose to do your elective rotations at SJMO as well. So how did you choose to do that? How did that work out for you? And did you feel it was a benefit, in your case, not moving around for year 4?
So some of it, you have to be strategic when you're applying for certain specialties. When it comes into the match, you have to have certain requirements that have to be done through, say, the ACGME. And so SJMO, when I was looking around, SJMO had they had the most amount of electives you could take that were ACGME accredited, and which is, again, something that you really need to do. So mine was I was a little bit different than other people, being that I had a wife and 2 kids. It's very expensive to move around. I would not only have to either move my kids away from their school, or I would keep them where they were and then have to try to pay for another place to stay for a month or so when I was doing other electives. So that just really wasn't feasible for me. So it worked out. Like I said, everything was strategy for us too. And so the reason I picked SJMO was because before, when I was in IMF, I already knew that they did the majority of the ACGME electives, that they were required, the requirements for ACGME. And so I strategically picked that place just because I knew that that was something I was going to want to do, is stay for both 3rd and 4th year.
And that worked out very well for you then, obviously.
Yeah, definitely.
That's excellent. Now, you mentioned, of course, and we talked about how you started in May of 2016. So let's
Mhm.
get back to that, because then when did you actually complete the program, and what's the date on your diploma?
So my very last day of my last rotation was ended on November 1st, 2019, and my diploma graduation date was November 30th.
And that's interesting. So I think one of the things that, again, through the eyes of prospective students, when they hear that you started, sort of off cycle in May, they immediately do the math, and it's most likely then, obviously, everyone's situation and timeline is a little bit different, but the most students would immediately assume that you're going to end off cycle, quote unquote, as
Sure.
well. And you did. So you ending in November, and when the immediate question that comes up from most prospective students is, well, then how am I going to spend those 6 or 7 months while I'm waiting to find out about, well, I'm waiting to start residency, essentially going from November when you finish to, when you start in just a couple of weeks. So how
Sure.
have you spent the past few months, and tell us what you've been doing since November?
Sure. So, there's a whole slew of different stuff you can do. What I wanted to do since I finished up again November 1st, going essentially nonstop since May of 16, I definitely wanted a little bit of a break. So I took all of November and all December off, and I just basically hung out with my family. We just did everything that we wanted to do that we couldn't do for the last 3.5, almost 4 years. And then my goal was initially, I guess to backtrack a little bit, I went through interviews. Were big time for November and December. So I made sure that all my interviews I tried to schedule as heavy as I could November, December, because I knew that all that time was off. I didn't have to take anything off from my electives. And so starting in January, February timeframe, I started to study for step 3. It was one of my goals that I wanted to get that complete before I started intern year. I had spoken to several residents on the interview trail that were second and third year residents, and they definitely said that they would recommend taking it as soon as you could, just to get it over with. That way you can dive into residency and not have to worry about that anymore. So I studied pretty hard for that, and my day one of taking step 3 was actually the day the lockdown happened around the country, and they canceled my test. So I didn't actually get to take it just yet.
Oh, wow. I mean, that would have been amazing to be able to do that. No, of course, most graduates, most residents don't take step 3 until a year or two into their residency, right? So
Sure.
you were really going to be ahead of the game. So
Right.
you'll still be ahead of the game when you can take it, since most don't take it till later. So let's go back to the residency application process then that you referenced. So how did you decide what programs you'd apply to? Did you have assistance from our career advisors at Ross? And just take us through that process of going through the application process.
So the application process itself, it takes a lot of time. Luckily, I had my wife. She was my backbone in all this. She put in so many hours dedicated to searching residency programs for general surgery all throughout the country. She looked at every single one of them, and our goals were not only just for me, so I'm a different perspective. So we looked into, is it going to be a good place to raise our kids? Is it something where we can afford housing? Is it good schooling for our kids? So all that went into play when it came to looking at the programs. Then we really started to dive down into the programs, and I wanted to see, I really like cardiothoracic surgery. So I thought it would have been great to see if I can get into a program that had a CT rotation throughout that 5 years. And so that was one of my things that I looked at. Looking at where are the residents getting fellowships from, what is their success rate on their AppSite scores, stuff like that. So there's quite a bit of information that you actually look into. So I would definitely recommend you start that earlier than later when it comes to searching what residencies or what programs you want to look for, because it's gonna take quite a bit of time to really get all the information that you need.
So why surgery?
I said throughout my interviews, they ask you that same thing too, and my answer was always, why not surgery? It's going through between, I'd say, first and second year, I was back and forth between surgery and emergency medicine. I had never really been in a surgery except for any surgeries I had on myself, and so I didn't really know what that experience would be like. But I figured emergency medicine would be pretty great. I was an EMT, and I worked as a police officer. I was in the military. It just seemed like it would go hand in hand with me, and that would work great. And so going into third year, my second rotation of third year was surgery. And I went into my very first surgery, and it worked out because the resident was busy and hadn't showed up. So I actually got to sit first assistant with the surgeon, which was incredible. And I was hooked from then on out. There was nothing else I could do.
And that's usually what happens for students. And you mentioned the interviews, and again, it's speaking from what I know, being asked through the years by prospective students. I know there's always a concern that here you are coming from this school that, that you may not have heard of early on in your search, but obviously now you've attended there and graduated. The concern from the prospective student point of view is always, is it going to be a detriment to me, in the residency interview process? So, what were your interviews like? What kinds of questions did they ask? And how did Ross factor into that, if it did?
So you'd be surprised how many people know about Ross. It was a lot more than I expected. And I actually went on some interviews where the actual program director was a Ross graduate. So that was pretty neat. Going through, I definitely had some that asked me, and they just said, so why Ross? Why a Caribbean school? And I gave them my answer, and they said, okay. And that was basically it. So it is a very true statement to say that once you get the interview, it doesn't matter where you went to school. You've passed those initial guidelines to get in. So at that point, your step score doesn't matter anymore. Where you went to school doesn't matter anymore. Now it's all about them speaking with you, you talking to the residents. Do you fit well with the program? Stuff like that.
You mentioned all of the considerations that you had certainly with your family and their well-being as part of this decision. And after you went through all of the choices that you had, you settled upon Northeast Georgia Medical Center as your first choice. And certainly I'm sure you were thrilled when you found out in mid-March that you got your first choice. So anything in particular about Northeast Georgia Medical Center that attracted you there?
It was before I even got to see the hospital. You had your pre-interview dinner, and we had faculty that showed up there along with the residents. And talking to the attendings, they had this genuine interest in the residents. It's hard to really describe how they were. It was unlike any other interview that I've been on. They actually had like a really strong sense of they wanted you. They wanted to teach you. They wanted to bring in residents rather than feeling that they kind of had to do it. So that definitely it piqued my interest. And then going into the hospital was absolutely amazing. It's tons of different ORs. They're sticking along with doing the robotic training. It was just one thing after the other. And then just driving around the city itself, or driving around Northeast Georgia, it just felt like home. So, it just kind of checked all the boxes.
Well, sometimes it just fits, right? You just
know. Right, exactly. Yep.
Oh, that's great. Well, we certainly wish you all the best of luck as you prepare to begin and well, very, very soon, just a couple of weeks as you embark on this next phase of your career. We certainly look forward to seeing your continued success as an alumnus of Ross University School of Medicine.
Thank you.
I'm going to wrap it up by asking you one more thing.
Sure.
And this is always a tough one, I think, but as you look back to when you were an applicant, knowing everything that you know now, would you do anything differently along the way?
Honestly, I can say no. I mean, I went in there knowing that I was going to study as hard as I could. I was going to try to get the best step score I could. Again, I know that's changing now because they changed the whole step 1 stuff, but you're going to need that step 2 CK score for sure. And you put in the work, that eventually these scores are going to matter. The rest of what the residencies are going to look for. Study as hard as you can, and it's really, that's all I can say. Everything kind of just worked out. I got lucky.
I think you make your own luck. It sounds like certainly seems like you've worked hard, to earn that luck. So, well, again, congratulations on being the 15,000th graduate of Ross University School of Medicine. We certainly appreciate your time this afternoon. Dr. Ryan Anderson, newly minted general surgery resident at Northeast Georgia Medical Center, first-year resident starting in just a couple weeks. Thanks again, Dr. Anderson, for your time this afternoon. And all of us at Ross, we wish you the best.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you as well to our audience. We certainly appreciate your interest in learning more about RUSM, and we'll certainly reply to your comments and any questions that you post below as soon as possible. Please like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, follow us on YouTube at RUSM Med School, RUSSMEDSCHOOL. Stay updated, everything happening at RUSM. With that, I'm Sean Powers, Director of Admissions at Ross University School of Medicine. Take care.